The room went completely still the moment my name was called. Not the polite kind of quiet that falls over a crowd when someone taps a microphone. The deep kind. The kind where you can hear the air conditioning and somebody's chair scraping back against the floor, and your own heartbeat louder than anything else. I was standing near the back of the banquet hall, still holding my clutch bag, still wearing the heels my roommate had convinced me to buy 3 years ago for some occasion that will come eventually. The occasion had come. I just hadn't expected it to feel like this. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start in the place where this story really began, which was not a banquet hall in downtown Chicago. It was a kitchen in Dayton, Ohio, 26 years ago, where my father was reading the sports section at the breakfast table, and my mother was asking me, for the 4th time that week, why I couldn't be more like my sister. Her name is Courtney, 4 years older than me, the kind of beautiful that makes strangers stop mid-sentence, the kind of put together that made our mother's friends say things like, "You must be so proud," every time they saw her at church. Courtney got a business degree from Ohio State. Courtney married a man who sold insurance and coached Little League. Courtney sent holiday cards with matching pajamas and a golden retriever in every photo. I became a trauma surgeon. That's not said to brag. I mean it more like, that's where I ended up, after years of choosing the hard thing every single time, and having nobody at home tell me it was worth it. My father worked 30 years at a GM plant outside of Dayton, solid man, quiet, mostly. He believed in working with your hands, showing up on time, not complaining. When I was 9 years old, I told him I wanted to be a doctor, and he looked at me the way people look at weather they don't understand. Not mean, just blank. Like the information didn't compute. "That's a long road," he said. That was it. That was the whole conversation. My mother was louder about her doubts. Not cruel, exactly, but the kind of mother who translated worry into comparison. Every report card, every award, every late night I spent studying at the kitchen table. She'd find a way to bring it back to Courtney. Courtney had more friends. Courtney was better at making people feel comfortable. Courtney knew how to be a woman in the world without making everyone around her feel like they were falling short. I didn't know how to explain to her that I wasn't trying to make anyone feel anything. I was just trying to become something. I left for Northwestern at 17. Full scholarship, pre-med, and a duffel bag that smelled like our laundry detergent for the first 3 weeks, until I finally ran out of the clothes I'd packed from home. I called every Sunday. My mother would tell me about Courtney's new apartment, Courtney's promotion, Courtney's boyfriend who might be the one. I would tell her I'd made Dean's List and she would say, "That's wonderful, honey," in the same tone she used when I told her I'd eaten breakfast. I stopped calling as often by sophomore year, not out of anger, out of self-preservation. Medical school was Johns Hopkins. Residency at Northwestern Memorial. Fellowship in trauma surgery at UCSF, which meant 4 more years of my mother saying, "When are you going to slow down, and don't you want a family? And your sister just got promoted to regional manager. Did I tell you that?" She told me that. Every call, for 6 years. I did not resent Courtney. I want to make that clear, because the story could go that way. And it didn't. Courtney and I were never close, exactly. But we were never enemies either. She was living the life she wanted. I was living the life I... The problem was only ever that my parents could only see value in one of those lives. By the time I was 31, I had performed over 200 emergency surgeries. I had been published in 3 peer-reviewed journals. I had been named to the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma Systems Policy, which meant flying to DC twice a year and sitting in rooms with people who actually made decisions about how hospitals worked in this country. I had a 1-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park that I loved, a group of colleagues who had become my closest friends, and a therapist I saw every other Thursday who kept gently pointing out that I had built an extraordinary life while remaining convinced it wasn't enough. She wasn't wrong. The thing about growing up being told that what you want doesn't count, not in a dramatic way, not with screaming or punishment, just in the quiet daily way of having your choices consistently undervalued, is that you carry that into your success. You achieve things and then look around waiting for someone to confirm that they meant something. You get to the top of a very tall mountain and your first instinct is to wonder if it's the right mountain. I was still doing that at 31. Standing in the window of my apartment on a Tuesday morning, looking at Lake Michigan in November. Board-certified trauma surgeon, with a publication record and a 401k and a very good cheese knife set, wondering if my father was proud of me. I didn't know yet. The call came in February, on a Thursday. Courtney, not my parents. Courtney calling to tell me she was getting married. I said all the right things. "I'm so happy for you, he sounds wonderful. Yes, of course I'll be there," and I meant them. I genuinely did. Marcus, her fiancé, was an architect from Cincinnati who apparently made very good ribs and coached Courtney's neighbor's daughter in soccer on weekends. He sounded like a good person. I was glad for her. The wedding was set for June. Chicago, because Courtney had moved here 4 years earlier and built her life in this city the same way I had, which was something I'd never really thought about before. That we had both, in our different ways, ended up in the same place. My parents would be driving up from Dayton. I told my therapist about it at our next session and she asked how I felt, and I said fine, which she wrote something down about. In March, my mother called to discuss the dress code. It was going to be a formal dinner, a venue, in the West Loop cocktail hour at 6. She mentioned 3 separate times that Courtney's friends were all very stylish. I told her I had nice things to wear. She said she was sure I did, in a tone that was not entirely sure. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, I got a text from my father. My father texted me maybe 4 times a year. Birthday, Christmas. Occasionally when a Bengals game went particularly well or particularly badly. So when his name came up on my phone at 8:47 on a Tuesday night while I was reviewing patient charts, I felt something small and specific happen in my chest. The way a door sounds when it opens that you've been waiting in front of for a long time. The text said, "Courtney tells me you're thinking of wearing something from the hospital to the wedding. Might want to reconsider. It's her day. Don't make it about you." I read it twice. Something from the hospital. I had mentioned once, in a group chat with my mother and Courtney, that I might wear the white coat pin I'd been given when I made Dent, a small gold caduceus I'd taken to pinning on formal blazers for events. I'd mentioned it as a passing thought. A maybe. That had become, by the time it reached my father, something from the hospital. I set my phone face down on the desk and sat there for a while. Here is the thing I have never been able to fully explain to people who didn't grow up the way I did. It wasn't the words. It was the assumption underneath them. That I would be the kind of person who would show up to her sister's wedding trying to take something. That my instinct would be to perform, to compete, to make it about me. After 31 years of making choices that were entirely, relentlessly about the work. The patients, the training, the institution, the mission. My father's first instinct was still that I was the difficult one. The one who needed to be managed. I didn't respond to the text. I called my therapist instead, which was not her regular Thursday, but she had an emergency slot at 9 p.m. and I took it. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage and talked to her through my earbuds for 45 minutes. She asked me what I needed from the wedding. I said I needed to go and stand up for my sister and then come home. She said that sounded like a good plan. I said I was still thinking about the pin. She said I should wear whatever made me feel like myself. I wore the pin, small, gold, on the lapel of a navy blazer over a silk ivory blouse. Simple, elegant, even. My friend Tara, who is a pediatric cardiologist and has very strong opinions about professional dressing, had helped me put the look together the previous fall for a conference in Boston. It was not a costume. It was not a statement. It was just what I looked like when I was dressed up, and also still myself. The venue was called the Meridian. 12-foot ceilings, exposed brick. Round tables with white linens and small clusters of ranunculus in cream and blush. I had been inside for maybe 3 minutes when my father found me near the bar. He looked older than I remembered. My father is not an old man. He was 62 in June, but there was something about seeing him in a suit that made him look like he was wearing a costume. He was more himself in a flannel shirt. We hugged. It was brief. He smelled like the same aftershave he had used since I was a child. Something woodsy and a little sharp. "You look nice," he said, and then his eyes went to the pin on my lapel and stayed there for just a beat too long. Not long enough to say anything. Long enough to register something. "Thank you," I said. We talked for about 2 minutes about the drive from Dayton. Then Courtney's mother-in-law came over to introduce herself, and my father turned toward her with a warmth and ease that he saved for strangers, and I excused myself. The ceremony was beautiful. Courtney was beautiful. I cried during the vows, which surprised me, because I don't generally cry at weddings. But she looked so happy and so settled into herself that something in me just released. Whatever complicated feeling I had about my sister, it was never about her. It was always about the space between us that our parents had created by making everything a competition that neither of us had signed up for. I cried, and I was glad to. At the reception, I was seated at a round table near the windows with some of Courtney's friends from her first job in Chicago, and Marcus's college roommate and his wife. Normal, easy conversation. The roommate's wife was a nurse practitioner, and we talked for a while about the state of emergency medicine in Illinois, which is not typical wedding small talk but suited me perfectly. I was having a genuinely good time. That was when my father came over to the table. He pulled up a chair, not from our table, from the empty table next to ours, and sat down between me and the window. Everyone else at the table went quiet, the way people do when they sense that something private is about to happen in a public place. "I wanted to say something," he said. I held my water glass. "Courtney's friends have been asking who you are. Apparently a few of them looked you up." He said this like it was an accusation. Like being looked up was a transgression. "I don't need you making a whole thing about your career at your sister's wedding, Reese." Reese. My name. He said it's the way you say a name when you want to remind someone of their place, I said. I'm not making anything about anything. I'm sitting at a table talking to people. He said, you know what I mean. I did know what he meant. He meant, stop being what you are. Or at least stop being it here, where I have to see it and don't know what to do with it. I looked at him for a moment, not angry. I was too tired for anger. I had been tired of this particular argument for about 20 years. I'm going to enjoy my sister's wedding, I said. That's all I'm here to do. He nodded. In the way that meant he didn't believe me, and pushed the borrowed chair back and walked away. I excused myself from the table a few minutes later and went to the restroom and stood in front of the mirror and breathed for a while. The woman looking back at me had a gold pin on a navy blazer, and eyes that were too bright, and a jaw that was set in the way I'd trained myself to set it in emergency rooms, and I needed to not show it. I thought about leaving. Genuinely. Just getting my coat and my bag, kissing Courtney on the cheek, and taking an Uber home. I thought about it for maybe 90 seconds. Then I thought about Courtney, finding out I'd left early. Courtney, who had nothing to do with any of this. Courtney, who had spent 4 months planning a wedding and deserved her sister to be in the room for the whole thing. I went back out. At 9:15, Courtney and Marcus had their first dance. At 9:40, a band started playing and the floor opened up. At 10, there was a cake that turned out to be lemon lavender, which sounds fussy, but was genuinely one of the best things I've ever eaten. At 10:20, I was standing near the edge of the dance floor, with a glass of Prosecco when Dr. Catherine Aldridge walked through the door. I need to pause here for a second, because this requires context. Dr. Catherine Aldridge is the chair of surgery at Northwestern Memorial. She is 61 years old, holds 3 honorary degrees, wrote the definitive textbook on damage control surgery that every trauma fellow in this country reads during their first year, and once testified before a Senate subcommittee about trauma system funding in rural America. She is also Marcus's aunt. I did not know that Marcus's aunt was Dr. Catherine Aldridge. That information had not come up in any of the wedding conversations I had been part of. She was not alone. She came in with a group of 7 or 8 people, some of whom I recognized. 2 were attendings from Northwestern. One was a physician I knew from the Trauma Policy Committee in D.C. One was a woman I'd seen at a conference in Houston, who I was fairly certain held an endowed chair at University of Chicago. They were colleagues. Dr. Aldridge's colleagues and Marcus's family, somehow, in the specific overlapping way that Chicago medicine works when you've been in it long enough. Marcus's best man went over to greet them, and I watched Dr. Aldridge scan the room stocks the way senior physicians do, quietly cataloging what's there, and then her eyes landed on me and she smiled. Reese Callahan, she said, walking over. Dr. Aldridge, I said. I didn't know you'd be here. Marcus is my nephew. I introduced him to Courtney at a department picnic 3 years ago, actually. She glanced down at the pin on my lapel and her smile widened. Chief Resident Pin, Northwestern, class of 2021, I said. I remember your residency evaluation, she said. You had the fastest hands in your cohort. Dr. Mercer said so in the review. I didn't know what to say to that. I had worked for 3 years under Dr. Mercer, and he had said approximately 40 words to me, directly, which is the norm in surgical training. You are not told. You are doing well. You are simply not told to stop. Discovering that he had said something like that in a formal evaluation felt like opening a drawer and finding money you hadn't remembered putting there. Thank you, I managed. She introduced me to the people she'd come with. And for the next few minutes, I was shaking hands and exchanging names, and doing the specific kind of catching up that physicians do at social events, which is really just discussing the field and how it's changing, and who's doing interesting work. It was comfortable in the way that professional conversation always is for me, the way I can navigate a room full of colleagues without any of the friction that family gatherings produce. I was in the middle of a conversation with the woman from U of C when I noticed my father. He was standing about 15 feet away, near a high-top table with a glass of something amber in his hand, watching. Just watching. He was watching Dr. Aldridge laugh at something I'd said. He was watching the woman from U of C lean in like my smassings was something she wanted to write down. He was watching 2 attending physicians from the hospital where I worked stand in a loose circle around me. Like this was the most natural arrangement in the room. He looked like he was doing math. I had a thought then that I immediately pushed away, because it wasn't useful and it wasn't kind. This is the first time you've ever actually seen me. I pushed it away. But it stayed. Dr. Aldridge, before moving on to find Marcus and Courtney, touched my arm briefly and said, "We should get you on the visiting lecturer series in the fall. The fellows would get a lot out of hearing from someone at your stage." "I'd be honored," I said. She moved on. The group dispersed. The band started playing something slow and the dance floor filled up again. I went back to my table, and the nurse practitioner asked if I knew those people. And I said some of them. From work, and she said, "That's so cool, you must be really good at what you do." At 11:15, My mother found me. This was the part I hadn't anticipated. My mother is not a complicated woman. I have said that to my therapist, and she always tilts her head slightly to one side, which is her way of suggesting that maybe I should reconsider. Maybe she's right. But what I mean is that my mother is not subtle. She says what she thinks, usually immediately, and her thoughts move in straight lines. She is not a woman who holds things back. So when she sat down next to me at the edge of the reception and took both of my hands in hers, cold hands, always cold, even in summer, and didn't say anything for a moment, I knew something was different. "I have to tell you something," she said. She reached into her bag. It was a small formal clutch, cream-colored, barely big enough to hold a phone and a credit card and a tube of lipstick. But she reached in and pulled out a piece of paper, folded into a small square, and handed it to me. I unfolded it. It was an article, printed from the Northwestern Memorial website, based on the header. The headline said Residency Spotlight. Reese Callahan named chief resident in trauma surgery. There was a small photo, me and Scrubs laughing at something, mid-conversation, from the day they'd taken it in the hallway outside the OR. I remembered that day. I hadn't known the photo was so good. "I printed this when it came out," my mother said. "I printed every one. I have a folder." I looked at her. "At home." "In the filing cabinet in the spare room, there's a folder." She was looking at our hands, not at me. "I have the article from when you matched at Hopkins, the one from when you got the fellowship, the press release about the committee in Washington, and some others." She paused. "I have the one from when you were pre-med at Northwestern, and you were in that study about sleep deprivation and surgery outcomes. That was in the Tribune, I think, or maybe just the Northwestern paper. I'm not sure. I printed both." I could not speak. "I know I haven't." She stopped, started again. "I know I haven't always said the right things. I worry. I worry because you work so hard, and you're so far away, and I don't always understand what you're doing, but I know that you're doing something that matters. And I..." She stopped again. Her hands tightened around mine. "I'm proud of you, Reese. I've always been proud of you. I just didn't know how to say it when you were standing in front of me." I was crying again. 2 crying moments in one evening, which is more than my annual average. "Mom," I said. "Don't," she said, which I think meant don't make me cry more than I already am. "I just needed you to know." We sat there for a while, hands held, the music going on around us. At some point Courtney came over and saw us and raised her eyebrows, and I shook my head just slightly, meaning later, I'll explain later, and she nodded and moved on with the graceful social awareness she had always had and I had always admired. My father didn't come back to talk to me that night. But near midnight, when I was getting my coat from the coat check, I turned around and he was standing about 4 feet away. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at the floor, specifically at a point somewhere between us with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Not exactly shame, not exactly pride. Something that didn't have a clean name. He said, "Those people you were talking to. The woman in the blue dress, Dr. Aldridge," I said. "She chairs the Department of Surgery at Northwestern." He nodded slowly. "She's Marcus's aunt," I said. "Small world." He nodded. I put on my coat, adjusted the collar. I was waiting for something, though I didn't know what. An apology maybe. Or an explanation. Or just a sentence that started with I and ended with something true. He said, "She seems to think a lot of you." "She's a mentor," I said. "A lot of people in that department have been." He put his hands in the pockets of his suit jacket. He was looking at the floor again. "I didn't understand what you were doing," he said. "All those years. I didn't follow it." "I know," I said. "I should have tried to." That was it. That was the whole thing. 7 words that were not an apology and not exactly an admission, and not enough, not fully, but were more than I had ever heard him come to in 52 years of living. 7 words said to the floor of a coat check in a wedding venue in the West Loop on a Saturday night in June. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't fully, and because I've spent too many years in medicine to lie reflexively. I said, "There's still time." He looked up then. His eyes, when they met mine, looked tired in the specific way of someone who has been carrying something they didn't know how to put down. "Yeah," he said. "I guess there is." I hugged him before I left. Brief, the same as always. He smelled like the same aftershave. Outside on the street the June air was warm, and a little humid in the way Chicago gets in early summer, where the heat hasn't fully settled but the cold is finally gone. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment waiting for my Uber, and looked up at the sky, which was the deep orange-black of a city night, and thought about a folder in a filing cabinet in the spare room of a house in Dayton, Ohio. Articles, printed and folded and kept. A 31-year-old woman in a navy blazer, standing on a sidewalk in Chicago, feeling something she had waited a long time to feel. Not a resolution, not a repair, but the faint beginning of something that might, given enough time and effort from the right people, grow into one. The Uber was a silver Camry. The driver asked if I'd had a good night, and I said yes, actually, I think I did. He nodded and pulled out into traffic, and I watched the West Loop slide past the window. All lit up and still moving, the city doing what cities do. holding everything at once, the grief and the beauty and the long, slow work of people trying to understand each other, one conversation at a time.